On a warm summer evening in 1994, millions of Americans were preparing for another ordinary night. Television sets were on. Families were spending time together. Los Angeles was moving through another busy day. But before the night was over, a shocking discovery would change the lives of several families, capture the attention of an entire nation, and create one of the most famous criminal trials in modern history. The name at the center of the storm was O.J. Simpson. To many people, O.J. Simpson was not a stranger. He was one of the most recognizable athletes in America. He was a football legend, a movie actor, a television personality, and a celebrity whose face had appeared in homes across the country for decades. He was the kind of person many believed was untouchable, someone who had achieved the highest levels of fame and success. But in 1994, the image of O.J. Simpson as an American hero began to collapse. He went from being celebrated as a sports icon to becoming the main suspect in a case that would dominate global headlines. The investigation, the courtroom battle, the media attention, and the final verdict created a story that went far beyond one criminal case. It became a conversation about fame, race, justice, policing, and the power of television. It was called by many people the trial of the century. This is the story of O.J. Simpson, the investigation that shocked America, and the trial that divided a nation. Orenthal James Simpson was born on July 9, 1947, in San Francisco, California. Growing up, Simpson faced many of the challenges common among young people living in difficult neighborhoods. His childhood was not one of privilege. His parents separated when he was young, and he spent his early years in a working-class environment. As a teenager, Simpson struggled academically and faced personal challenges. However, sports became the area where he discovered his talent. Football changed his life. His athletic ability became impossible to ignore, and he eventually earned an opportunity to play college football at the University of Southern California, one of the most respected football programs in the United States. At USC, Simpson became a national sensation. His speed, strength, and ability to avoid defenders made him one of the most exciting players in college football. In 1968, he won the Heisman Trophy, one of the highest individual honors in American college sports. That achievement placed him among the most celebrated athletes in the country. When Simpson entered the National Football League, expectations were enormous. He was selected as the first overall pick in the 1969 NFL Draft by the Buffalo Bills. At first, his professional career was challenging. The team struggled, and Simpson did not immediately reach the level of success many expected. But eventually, everything changed. Simpson became one of the most dominant running backs in football history. In 1973, he made history by becoming the first player in the NFL to rush for more than 2,000 yards in a single season. At that time, that achievement was considered almost impossible. His combination of speed and power made him one of the most feared players on the field. Fans loved him. Sports journalists praised him. Advertisers wanted him. O.J. Simpson was becoming more than an athlete. He was becoming a brand. After retiring from football, Simpson successfully transitioned into entertainment. He appeared in films and television shows. He worked as a sports commentator. He became known for his friendly personality and public image. One of his most famous roles was as a spokesperson for the car rental company Hertz. In commercials, Simpson was shown running through airports as part of a campaign that helped make him even more recognizable. For many Americans, seeing O.J. Simpson on television was normal. He represented success, he represented confidence, he represented the idea that someone could rise from a difficult background and achieve everything. But behind the public image, Simpson's personal life had become complicated. In 1977, Simpson met Nicole Brown, a young woman who worked as a waitress at a nightclub in Los Angeles. The two began a relationship, and in 1985 they got married. Their marriage attracted public attention because Simpson was already a famous personality. To outsiders, they appeared to be a successful celebrity couple. They had children together and lived a life that seemed glamorous. However, behind the public image, their relationship experienced serious problems. The marriage was marked by conflict, and in 1992, Nicole Brown Simpson filed for divorce. After the divorce, both continued with their lives separately, but their relationship would remain a major focus when investigators later examined events leading up to 1994. On the night of June 12, 1994, Nicole Brown Simpson attended a dinner at an Italian restaurant in Los Angeles with friends. Her children were also nearby. That same night, Ronald Goldman, a 25-year-old restaurant worker and friend of Nicole's, visited the area. Goldman had no connection to fame or celebrity. He was simply a young man whose life would become connected forever to one of the biggest criminal investigations in American history. Later that night, something happened outside Nicole Brown Simpson's home on Bundy Drive in Los Angeles. The details of what happened there would become the subject of intense investigation, courtroom arguments, and public debate. Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman were found dead outside the property. The discovery shocked the neighborhood. Police officers arrived and began investigating. Very quickly, the case attracted enormous media attention. The victims' identities became known nationwide. And because one of the people connected to the investigation was O.J. Simpson, the story immediately became much larger than a local crime investigation. When police began looking into the case, their attention turned towards Simpson. At the time, Simpson was living in Los Angeles and remained one of the most famous people in America. Investigators began collecting evidence and questioning people connected to the case. Meanwhile, television networks across the country began covering every development. The public wanted answers. Who was responsible? What evidence existed? Would one of America's most famous celebrities face criminal charges? The pressure on investigators was enormous. Every decision was being watched. Every statement was being analyzed. And every new piece of information became national news. Several days after the killings, police announced that they wanted Simpson to surrender. The situation quickly became one of the biggest media events in American history. Instead of immediately turning himself in, Simpson was involved in a dramatic incident that would be broadcast live across the country. On June 17, 1994, television viewers saw something almost unbelievable. A white Ford Bronco was traveling slowly on Los Angeles highways, while police vehicles followed behind. Inside the vehicle was O.J. Simpson. News helicopters followed the chase from above. Television stations interrupted normal programming to show the event live. Millions of people watched. Some viewers were shocked. Others were confused. Many simply could not look away. The slow-speed pursuit became a cultural moment. People gathered around television screens in homes, offices, restaurants, and public places. The image of the white Bronco moving through Los Angeles became one of the most recognizable scenes of the 1990s. For many Americans, it was the moment when the case transformed from a major news story into a national obsession. The media coverage surrounding Simpson was unlike anything seen before. Every newspaper carried updates. Television reporters followed every movement. Cameras waited outside locations connected to the case. The public became deeply involved. People discussed the investigation at work, at school, and at home. Some people believed Simpson was innocent and that the evidence would clear him. Others believed the investigation pointed toward his involvement. Before the trial even began, America was already divided. Following the arrest, the legal battle began. The prosecution prepared a case, arguing that Simpson was responsible for the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. The defense team prepared to challenge that argument. Because of Simpson's fame and wealth, he was able to hire some of the most well-known lawyers in the United States. The team included attorneys with extensive courtroom experience. Among them was Robert Shapiro, a respected criminal defense lawyer who initially became the lead attorney. Later, another famous attorney, Johnny Cochran, became one of the most visible members of Simpson's defense team. The group became known as the Dream Team because of the reputation and experience of the lawyers involved. Their strategy would become one of the most closely watched legal defenses in history. When the trial of O.J. Simpson officially began in January 1995, few people could have predicted the level of attention it would receive. Courtrooms had always attracted public interest when famous people were involved. But this case was different. It was not simply a legal battle between prosecutors and defense attorneys. It had become a national conversation. Millions of people followed the trial almost every day. Television networks dedicated hours of coverage to the proceedings. Newspapers published constant updates. Legal experts analyzed every statement, every piece of evidence, and every decision made inside the courtroom. For many viewers, the trial became a daily event. Some watched because they wanted to understand the evidence. Others watched because of the drama surrounding the lawyers and witnesses. And some watched because they saw the trial as a reflection of larger issues happening in American society. Inside the courtroom, however, the mission was much simpler. The prosecution had to prove that O.J. Simpson was responsible for the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense only needed to create enough uncertainty in the minds of jurors. That difference would become the foundation of one of the most famous courtroom battles ever seen. The trial took place at the Los Angeles County Superior Court. The judge assigned to oversee the case was Lance Ito. Unlike many criminal trials, this one would be broadcast to the public because cameras were allowed inside the courtroom. This decision would have a massive impact. Every argument, every emotional moment, and every dramatic exchange could be seen by millions of people. The courtroom became a stage. The lawyers became television personalities, and the smallest details became national discussions. The prosecution team was led by Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden. Their argument was that the evidence pointed toward Simpson. They presented a timeline of events, forensic evidence, witness testimony, and other information that they believed connected Simpson to the crime scene. One of their biggest challenges was convincing the jury that the evidence was reliable and that investigators had followed proper procedures. The defense team, meanwhile, took a different approach. Instead of only arguing that Simpson was innocent, they focused heavily on questioning the investigation itself. They argued that mistakes were made. They questioned whether evidence had been properly handled. They suggested that investigators may have been influenced by assumptions because of Simpson's celebrity status. Their message was clear. If there was uncertainty about the evidence, the jury could not convict. One of the most important figures in the defense strategy was Johnnie Cochran. Cochran was already a famous lawyer before the Simpson trial. He was known for his powerful courtroom speeches, ability to connect with juries, and experience handling cases involving allegations of police misconduct. During the trial, Cochran became one of the most recognizable figures associated with the defense. He understood that the case was not only about forensic evidence, it was also about public perception. The defense team argued that the Los Angeles Police Department had serious credibility issues, especially because of previous controversies involving police treatment of minorities. This argument became central to the trial. A major turning point came when the defense focused attention on Detective Mark Furman. Furman was one of the first police officers to arrive at Simpson's property during the investigation. The defense questioned his credibility and introduced evidence suggesting that Furman had previously made racist comments. This became a major issue in the trial. The defense argued that Furman's background raised questions about whether evidence could be trusted. The prosecution argued that the evidence should be judged based on facts, not distractions. But the controversy surrounding Furman became one of the biggest issues of the entire case. Another major part of the prosecution's case involved forensic evidence. At the time, DNA technology was still relatively new to many members of the public. Although DNA evidence had already been used in criminal investigations, many ordinary people were still unfamiliar with how it worked. The prosecution presented DNA evidence that they argued connected Simpson to the crime scene. Experts explained scientific methods, laboratory procedures, and the significance of genetic evidence. The defense, however, challenged the reliability of some of the testing procedures. They argued that mistakes in collecting, handling, and processing evidence could create uncertainty. The debate over DNA evidence became one of the most important scientific discussions ever presented in a widely watched courtroom. As the trial continued, one thing became clear. The case would not be decided only by evidence. It would also be decided by how the jury interpreted that evidence. The prosecution had to present a convincing story. The defense had to create questions, and every moment inside the courtroom mattered. One of the most famous moments of the entire trial involved a pair of gloves. Prosecutors presented gloves they said were connected to the crime. They believed these gloves were important evidence linking Simpson to the case. During the trial, Simpson was asked to try on the gloves in front of the jury. The courtroom became extremely tense. Everyone watched closely as Simpson attempted to put on the gloves. The moment was broadcast across the world. The defense argued that the gloves appeared too small for Simpson. The prosecution argued that there were explanations for why the gloves may not have fit in the courtroom. However, the image of Simpson struggling with the gloves became one of the defining moments of the trial. Johnny Cochran used the glove demonstration as a powerful moment during his closing argument. He told jurors, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." The phrase became one of the most remembered lines in American legal history. It summarized the defense's larger argument: if there was reasonable doubt, the jury had a duty to acquit. But the trial was not only about the famous glove moment. Behind the television coverage and dramatic courtroom scenes was a serious legal battle involving complicated evidence. The jury heard testimony from dozens of witnesses. They listened to experts explain forensic science. They watched lawyers challenge each other's arguments. The process lasted for months, and as the trial continued, public interest only increased. Outside the courtroom, America was experiencing a historic moment. The trial exposed deep divisions in public opinion. Many African Americans viewed the case through the history of racial tensions and concerns about police treatment. The name of Rodney King, whose beating by Los Angeles police officers had been captured on video in 1991, was often mentioned during discussions surrounding the trial. The 1992 Los Angeles riots after the acquittal of police officers involved in the King case had already damaged trust between many communities and law enforcement. For some people, the Simpson trial represented another moment where questions about police credibility and fairness were being examined. Others believed the case was being influenced too much by issues outside the evidence. The courtroom became a place where different views of America collided. Was this simply a murder trial involving a celebrity? Or was it also a reflection of deeper problems within society? That question followed the case from beginning to end. As the months passed, the lawyers became celebrities themselves. The public followed their strategies, personalities, and courtroom performances. Johnny Cochran became known for his dramatic presentations. Marcia Clark became one of the most recognized prosecutors in the country. Robert Shapiro and other members of the defense team received enormous attention. Every argument created headlines. Every witness appearance became a major television event. The trial also changed the relationship between crime and television. Before this case, many people had never watched a criminal trial closely. But the Simpson trial introduced millions of viewers to courtroom procedures. People learned about evidence rules, objections, cross-examinations, and jury decisions. For better or worse, the trial transformed criminal justice into a form of public entertainment. However, behind the cameras and media attention were real people affected by tragedy. Nicole Brown Simpson's family and Ronald Goldman's family continued to seek justice while watching the case unfold publicly. For them, the trial was not entertainment. It was a painful process involving the loss of loved ones. Their experiences often became overshadowed by the celebrity status of the defendant and the massive media attention surrounding the courtroom. As the trial moved toward its final stages, the question remained, would the jury believe the prosecution's case, or would the defense successfully convince them that reasonable doubt existed? After months of testimony, arguments, and controversy, the world waited for the final decision. The moment that millions had been watching for was approaching: the verdict. After months of testimony, arguments, and intense public attention, the O.J. Simpson trial reached its final stage. For the prosecution and the defense, every moment that had happened inside the courtroom now came down to one final opportunity: the closing arguments. This was the moment when both sides would attempt to summarize their entire case and convince the jury that their interpretation of the evidence was the correct one. For the prosecution, the goal was to remind jurors of the evidence they believed connected Simpson to the crime. For the defense, the goal was to strengthen the idea that serious questions remained unanswered. In criminal trials, the burden of proof is extremely important. The prosecution must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense does not have to prove innocence. They only have to show that the prosecution's case is not strong enough for a conviction. This principle would become the foundation of the final arguments. The prosecution began by telling the jury that the evidence formed a clear story. They argued that the physical evidence, timeline, and circumstances surrounding the case pointed towards Simpson. They reminded jurors of the testimony they had presented throughout the trial. They argued that the evidence was not based on one single piece of information, but rather on many different elements that they believed came together. Their message was that the jury should look at the entire picture. According to the prosecution, when all the evidence was considered together, it showed Simpson's involvement. The defense, however, continued to focus on doubt. They argued that the investigation contained too many problems. They questioned the actions of some investigators. They challenged the handling of evidence. They questioned whether mistakes had affected the reliability of the case. Their argument was that even if some evidence appeared suspicious, the jury could not ignore the possibility that errors or misconduct had affected the investigation. The defense repeatedly reminded jurors that the standard was not whether Simpson was probably responsible. The standard was whether guilt had been proven beyond reasonable doubt. Johnny Cochran's final presentation became one of the most remembered moments of the trial. He spoke directly to the jury, emphasizing the weaknesses he believed existed in the prosecution's case. He reminded them of the glove demonstration. He questioned the reliability of the investigation. He argued that the case against Simpson was not strong enough. The famous phrase associated with his closing argument, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit," became the central message of the defense. It was short, it was memorable, and it captured the strategy that had been developed throughout the trial. After closing arguments, the jury began deliberations. The jurors had to review months of testimony and evidence before reaching a decision. Around the world, people waited. News organizations prepared for the announcement. Businesses, schools, and homes followed the situation closely. Many people believed the verdict could become one of the most significant moments in American legal history. On October 3, 1995, the jury returned to the courtroom. The atmosphere was tense. Millions of people watched live as the verdict was announced. The judge asked Simpson to stand. The courtroom became silent. Then the decision was revealed. The jury found O.J. Simpson not guilty. The reaction was immediate. Across America, people responded in very different ways. Some celebrated the verdict, believing that justice had been served and that the prosecution had failed to prove its case. Others reacted with disappointment and disbelief, believing that Simpson should have been convicted. The country was divided. The verdict became more than a legal decision. It became a symbol interpreted differently by different groups of people. For Simpson and his supporters, the verdict represented freedom and a victory over what they believed was an unfair investigation. For others, the verdict represented a failure of the justice system. The debate continued long after the courtroom doors closed. The O.J. Simpson trial had ended, but the story was not over. A criminal trial and a civil trial operate differently under American law. A criminal trial requires prosecutors to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. A civil trial uses a lower standard of proof and focuses on responsibility and damages. Because of this difference, the families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman pursued a civil case against Simpson. In 1996, a wrongful death lawsuit was filed against Simpson. The civil case focused on whether Simpson could be held financially responsible for the deaths. Unlike the criminal trial, this case did not involve the possibility of prison. Instead, it focused on financial compensation for the families. The civil trial received significant attention, although not at the same level as the criminal trial. In February 1997, the civil jury reached a decision. Unlike the criminal jury, the civil jury found Simpson responsible for the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. The jury ordered him to pay damages to the victims' families. The result created another major public discussion. Some people saw it as a contradiction. How could someone be found not guilty in one case but responsible in another? The answer was that the two trials had different legal standards. A criminal conviction requires proof beyond reasonable doubt. A civil judgment requires a lower level of proof. Following the civil judgment, Simpson faced financial difficulties. The legal battles and public controversy continued to affect his life. The image he once had as a beloved sports hero had permanently changed. He was no longer viewed by the public only as a football legend. He became one of the most controversial figures in American history. Years later, Simpson would face another major legal problem. In 2007, he was involved in an incident in Las Vegas, Nevada, involving a group of men and sports memorabilia. Simpson claimed he was attempting to recover items that belonged to him. However, authorities investigated the incident, and Simpson was charged with multiple offenses. In 2008, he was convicted and sentenced to prison. This case was unrelated to the 1994 deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. After serving several years, Simpson was released from prison in 2017. By then, his public image had changed dramatically from the days when he was one of America's most famous athletes. The man once known primarily for football had become permanently connected to one of the most debated criminal cases in history. The legacy of the O.J. Simpson trial continues decades later. Few cases have had such a powerful impact on popular culture, media coverage, and public discussions about justice. The trial changed how Americans watched court cases. It showed the influence of television in shaping public opinion. It demonstrated how a legal case could become a national conversation. The trial also raised important questions. How much influence should celebrity have in the justice system? How should society deal with questions about police credibility? How does public opinion affect the way people understand evidence? These questions remain part of discussions about the case today. One of the most significant impacts of the trial was the way it changed media coverage of criminal cases. Before Simpson's trial, courtroom coverage was often limited. But after millions watched the proceedings daily, networks realized that major trials could attract enormous audiences. The case helped create a new era of televised legal drama. The trial also changed the public's understanding of forensic evidence. DNA evidence became a topic discussed by ordinary people. Many viewers learned about scientific testing methods for the first time. However, the case also showed that scientific evidence alone does not always decide a trial. The way evidence is collected, presented, and interpreted can greatly influence the outcome. Another lasting impact of the trial was the conversation about race in America. The case took place in a country still dealing with difficult questions about relationships between minority communities and law enforcement. For many people, the trial was viewed through the lens of those larger issues. For others, those issues distracted from the facts of the case. The debate showed how a single trial could represent very different things to different people. The victims' families also remained an important part of the story. While much attention focused on Simpson, lawyers, and television coverage, Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman were the people whose lives were lost. Their families continued to remember them and seek accountability. The case serves as a reminder that behind every major criminal investigation are real people whose lives are permanently changed. Today, the O.J. Simpson trial remains one of the most famous legal events in modern history. Documentaries continue to examine it. Books continue to analyze it. People continue to debate what happened and what the verdict represented. Some see it as a story about reasonable doubt. Some see it as a story about celebrity and privilege. Some see it as a story about race and justice in America. But regardless of personal opinions, one fact remains. The O.J. Simpson trial changed the way the world viewed crime, media, and the courtroom. From the moment a shocking discovery was made in Los Angeles in 1994, to the dramatic verdict watched by millions around the world, the case became more than a criminal trial. It became a defining moment of an era. A moment when sports, entertainment, law, and society collided. A moment when one man's name became connected forever to one of the most watched trials in history. This was the story of O.J. Simpson, the trial that shocked America.